You ever look at your own reflection and wonder who the hell you really are? That was me 3:27 a.m. Staring into the bathroom mirror of a half-lit motel off Route 41 in eastern Tennessee, knuckles white around a bottle of cheap bourbon, trying not to drown in my own thoughts. My name's Chase Whitaker. I'm 30. On paper, I'm a successful civil engineer based in Asheville, North Carolina. I design bridges that carry thousands of cars a diet somehow. I've never figured out how to build one back to the place I came from. Or maybe I never had a place to begin with. I wasn't raised by monsters, just ghosts and human skin people who said all the right words when neighbors were around, but went silent once the doors were closed. My parents were foster types. Decent income, spotless reputation, immaculate lawn. But when the lights went out, it was like I disappeared too. I was the boy who lived inside their house, but outside their hearts. I grew up in a town called Pine Hollow, deep in rural Kentucky. The kind of place where secrets settle like dust in the corners. You never really see them until the sun hits just right. By then it's too late. My foster parents, Waylon and Patrice Whitaker, took me in when I was barely 2 months old. That's what the paperwork said anyway. They had one biological son, Nolan, 2 years older than me. And let me tell you, if Golden Boy Nolan was the fire, I was the ash left behind. From the outside, we looked like a postcard family. Patrice was a school teacher who smelled like lavender and always wore pearls, even to the grocery store. Waylon was a proud former Marine who worked for the county's roads department. They'd introduce Nolan with pride, our boy, the honor roll student. But me, I'd get a dry dismissive, "This is Chase. We took him in. Not this is our son, not even this is our foster child. Just, we took him in." I learned early that love in that house came with a price tag I couldn't afford. I remember being 7, sitting on the cold linoleum floor of our kitchen, watching Nolan blow out candles on a cake that could feed a wedding party. When I asked if I could have a party too, Patrice looked at me like I'd just asked for a private jet. "Chase, be grateful. You have a roof over your head. You get what you need, not what you want." But Nolan always got both. Even at school, the difference showed. Patrice would pack Nolan gourmet, lunches P, B, and J, with the crusts cut off, a cookie, a juice box. Mine was a peanut butter sandwich, no jelly, no drink, just dry bread and dry silence. And still, I tried. God, I tried. I brought home straight A's. Cleaned the garage without being asked. Learned how to iron Waylon's shirts the military way, just so he'd maybe say thanks once. But what I got instead? "Don't act like you're doing us a favor, boy. This house isn't yours." They made sure I knew that every single day. I wasn't allowed to invite friends over. I didn't even have my own bedroom until Nolan moved out for college. It's just a tiny cot in the laundry room, next to the water heater. No windows, just spinning cycles and the smell of detergent and rust. My only real escape, a neighbor down the road, old man Gus. Gus was a war vet turned mechanic who ran a dusty little repair shop behind his farmhouse. He smelled like motor oil and smoked cigars like they were oxygen. Everyone thought he was just a grumpy recluse, but to me, he was the only human being in Pine Hollow who ever looked me in the eye and meant it. "That kid." He'd grunt while handing me a wrench. People like us, we don't fit in. We build our own damn place to belong. I started spending more time at Gus's garage than my own house. Taught me everything. How to change brake pads, how to listen for a dying transmission, how to light a cigar even when your hands were shaking. But more than that, Gus taught me how to survive. "You're going to get out of this town someday, Chase," he told me one sweltering July evening, sweat pouring off his forehead as we replaced the clutch on a '93 Chevy. "But don't leave without finding out who the hell you are. That's the only way you won't get lost out there." I didn't understand what he meant at the time. I thought he was just being dramatic, until I found the box. I was 16, digging through a busted storage trunk in the Whitaker's attic, looking for my old winter coat. That's when I found it, a small shoebox wrapped in duct tape, wedged between tax files and Christmas decorations. Inside, one faded baby photo of me, a tiny hospital bracelet, and a birth certificate with half the fields blank. Mother's name, Margot. No last name, no father listed. Just Margot. No one had ever spoken that name before. It hit me like thunder in a clear sky. That night, I confronted Patrice. She looked at the certificate, then looked at me like I'd pulled a gun on her. "Where did you find this?" "In the attic," I said. Why is there no last name? Why doesn't it say who my father is? Patricia's face tightened like a vice. Put that back where you found it. That woman was nothing. She left you in a basket at a fire station. You're lucky we took you in. I stared at her. You've known all this time? You knew her name? She doesn't matter, she snapped. You're a Whitaker now. Act like one. But I wasn't. I never had been. From that moment on, something inside me fractured. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I was just numb. Like the strings that held my identity together had snapped and the puppet was falling. I stopped trying. At school, I barely passed. At home, I spoke only when spoken to. The only place I still felt human was at Gus's shop. When I turned 18, I packed 2 duffel bags and left Pine Hollow without a word. Gus handed me his old toolbox and hugged me once, no words, no tears. Just a nod that said go. I enrolled in a community college, then transferred to a 4-year university for engineering. I worked 2 jobs to stay afloat, graduated with honors, got hired by a reputable civil firm in Asheville. The kind of story that people put in alumni brochures. But here's the truth, no one tells you. Success doesn't fix abandonment. You can build the tallest skyscraper, drive the flashiest car, earn the biggest paycheck, but when the sun goes down and the noise fades, you're still the same boy, staring at a shoebox in a dusty attic, wondering why no one wanted you? And that's how I ended up here, in a rundown motel 3 hours outside Memphis, sipping bourbon like it held answers. Because earlier that morning I got a letter, the real one, in the mail, which no return address. Inside was a single sentence on a torn piece of lined paper. She's still alive. Her name is Margot Lancaster. She never stopped looking for you. That was it. No signature. No explanation. I read it 20 times before I could even breathe. Margot Lancaster? Was that her last name? Was this a joke? Why now? I don't know who sent the letter. I don't know if it's real. Something in me, a part that never healed. Can't ignore it. So I took off. No plan, no destination, just a gut feeling and a name. Margot, who are you? Why does a part of me already miss you? The further I drove, the quieter the world became. Gone were the hums of city traffic and blinking crosswalks. Now it was empty highway, wind slicing past the windows, and my thoughts roaring louder than the engine. I didn't know where I was headed, only that I was following a phantom with a name. Margot Lancaster. I whispered it to myself again, testing how it felt on my tongue. Foreign, familiar, fragile. Every time I said it, something strange stirred inside my chest. Not quite hope, not quite fear, something in between. Like I was a kid again, waiting for a knock on the door that never came. I had one clue. Lancaster County, Tennessee. A hunch pulled from the letter's postmark. That was it. Just a town name and a ghost. By noon, I pulled into a quiet diner off Highway 72, the kind of place with rusted signage. Faded menus and waitresses who call everyone honey. The bell above the door jingled as I walked in, the scent of bacon grease and burnt coffee wrapping around me like a worn-out quilt. "Take a seat anywhere," said a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a hairnet that had seen better decades. I slid into a corner booth. My reflection stared back at me from the darkened, wind-rumpled flannel, all 2-day stubble, eyes that looked like they hadn't seen sleep since Thursday. She handed me a laminated menu, but I didn't open it. Instead, I asked, "You ever heard of anyone named Margot Lancaster?" The waitress froze. Her smile faltered for just a moment, then she covered it with a laugh. "That's a name I haven't heard in a long time." My stomach tightened. "So, you do know her?" The woman leaned slightly closer, voice dropping. "Depends." "Why are you looking for her?" I hesitated. "What do you even say?" "Hi, I might be her abandoned son, based on a creepy letter with no return address." "She might be family," I finally said. The woman studied me for a long moment. "You got her eyes?" That's when I knew. She pointed toward the back wall. "Margot runs the flower shop down on Main. Petals and moss. Corner building with a white trellis. She's usually there till sundown." I left a 20 on the table and walked out without touching the coffee. It was a 3-minute drive to the flower shop, but it felt like a lifetime. Petals. And moss looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. Wisteria vines curled around the porch columns. Faded chalkboard signs welcomed passers-by with messages like "Breathe in beauty" and "You are seen." I stood in front of the door, one hand hovering over the handle. What if she didn't want to see me? What if I was just another shadow from a past she buried? I took a breath, opened the door, and stepped inside. The scent hit first jasmine, rosemary, wild peonies. Soft indie music drifted through the air, and behind a cluttered counter stood a woman arranging white lilies. Her back was to me. She moved with precision, not grace. Like someone who learned to be careful because the world hadn't been kind. I stepped closer. "Excuse me." She turned and my heart stopped. I'd never seen her before in my life. But somehow, I knew her face. The same sea glass green eyes as mine, the same arch in the eyebrows, the same slight crease near the mouth when nervous. She blinked at me, frozen in place, hands still holding a bouquet. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft but wary. I swallowed. "Are you?" "Margot Lancaster." "Yes," she said slowly. "Who's asking? My name's Chase. Chase Whitaker." Her face went pale. She staggered back slightly, hands trembling. The bouquet slipped and hit the counter with a soft thud. "Oh," she whispered. "No, it can't be." I stepped forward. "I got a letter. It said you were alive, that you'd been looking for me." Tears welled in her eyes before she turned away, covering her mouth with both hands. "I need to know," I said, my voice cracking. "Are you my mother?" She didn't answer with words.
What?
She just nodded once, twice, then completely broke. The kind of cry that sounds like something deep in your bones snapping in half. I stood there frozen, not knowing what to do, not knowing if I should reach out or run. But I stayed. When she finally turned back to me, her face was wet, her hands shaking. "I thought I'd never see you again," she whispered. "I dreamed of this moment for 30 years. And now that you're here, I don't know how to breathe." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Why didn't you come for me?" "I did," she whispered. "You were gone before I could." We sat on a bench outside the shop, the late afternoon sun casting long golden shadows across the sidewalk. I nursed a bottle of water she handed me. She just stared into space, hands locked between her knees. "You were born in a firehouse," she said finally. "But that's not where I left you. That's where they took you." I stared at her. "What does that mean?" she exhaled, shaky. "When I had you, I was 17. My parents. They were devout, strict. My father was a pastor. My pregnancy was a scandal." She looked at me then, really looked at me as if confirming that I was real. "They threatened to send me away, said the baby would be put up for adoption immediately. That I'd be branded for life if I didn't give you up, but I couldn't do it." Her voice cracked again. I ran. She reached into her coat and pulled out a crumpled Polaroid, the same photo I'd found in the attic years ago. A newborn swaddled in a striped hospital blanket. Me. "I kept you for 3 weeks," she whispered. "We hid in a motel outside Nashville. I used a fake name, got a part-time job, was going to raise you alone. What happened? They found me." She looked away. "My parents hired someone. Lawyer, a private investigator, I don't know. One night I came back from my shift, and you were gone. They'd taken you." Her shoulders shook. "They said you'd been placed in a good Christian home, that I'd never see you again unless I wanted to be disowned forever." I was 17, broke and terrified. I sat there trying to absorb it all. My heart pounded, so hard it felt like it echoed in my teeth. "Why didn't you fight?" "I tried," she said. "I filed reports. Hired a lawyer with the little money I had, but everything was sealed. It erased the trail. The adoption went through under someone else's name. I was shut out. And you never stopped looking." She shook her head, wiping her eyes. "Every year, every birthday. Wrote letters I never sent. I searched databases, hired people. I didn't even know what name they gave you." She reached into her pocket again and pulled out a bundle of folded papers, worn and yellowed. Letters. To me. Unsent. Unread. I couldn't breathe. She placed them in my hand. "I know I don't deserve anything. Not forgiveness. Not even a second chance. But if you want to read them..."
Birds.
"I just wanted you to know you were always loved. Even when the world tried to erase you." Stared at the letters. My entire identity had just been ripped apart and reassembled in the span of a single afternoon. And yet, something in me felt whole for the first time in years. Later that night, she took me to her home, a small cabin on the edge of a lake, surrounded by pines and fireflies. Inside, it smelled like cedarwood and lemon. She showed me photos from her life, told me about the years she spent working odd jobs, saving enough to start the flower shop, about the partners who left, the ones who stayed, the nights she cried herself to sleep. "I used to leave the porch light on every year on your birthday," she said, handing me a slice of pecan pie. "Just in case you found your way home." I didn't say much. But I didn't leave either. That night, lying in the guest bed, holding the stack of letters she'd written me over the years, I found one dated when I was 7. "I hope you're happy, wherever you are. I hope they're kind to you. Hope they remember to tell you you're loved. You deserve the whole world, baby boy. You always did." I pressed the letter to my chest, closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, let myself cry. The next morning, I woke to the sound of her humming in the kitchen, making breakfast like she'd done it every day of my life. And for a brief, fragile moment, it felt like I'd never been gone. 2 days passed like dreams you don't want to wake from. Mornings at Margot's lakefront cabin were quiet and warm, like a part of the world untouched by pain. She made me coffee in an old ceramic mug with faded sunflowers on it. We talked cautiously at first, then with more ease. She wanted to know everything, what my childhood was like, where I went to school, what I did for work. I spared her the worst parts, not because I wanted to protect her, but because I didn't want to relive them. "You were an engineer?" she asked, as we sat by the lake one evening watching dragonflies skim the surface. "That's incredible, Chase." I nodded. "Yeah, civil design. Bridges, mostly." "You always loved bridges," she said softly. I turned to her, confused. "What do you mean?" "When you were a baby, I had this little picture book. You always pointed at the bridge pages. It's the ones with trains running across them." I felt my chest tighten. She remembered that. Even after all these years, she remembered that. That night I couldn't sleep. Kept staring at the ceiling, mind spinning. It didn't feel real. How do you rebuild something that was never built to begin with? How do you go from being a stranger to a son? Around 2 a.m., I stepped outside. The air was cool. Stars spilled across the sky like scattered salt. That's when I noticed it. A small lantern hanging on her porch lit, flickering softly. I stared at it for a long time. Then it hit me. That was the light. The one she left on for me every year. The next morning, she handed me a box. "Found this in the attic last night," she said, avoiding my eyes. "Thought you might want it." Inside were old keepsakes, baby socks, a beaded bracelet, and a photo of us from the hospital. I couldn't have been more than a few days old. Her hair was a mess, eyes tired, but she was smiling like the world finally made sense. "I never stopped being your mother," she said quietly, even when I wasn't allowed to say it out loud. I held the photo, then held her gaze. "Do you know who sent the letter?" I asked. She shook her head. "I didn't, I swear. I don't know who knew enough to reach you, but someone wanted me to find you." She nodded slowly. "Seems like it." I sat with that for a moment. There was more to this story. More than either of us knew. That afternoon, I drove into town to clear my head. I passed the diner again, the one where I first heard her name. I parked and walked in. Same waitress, same tired smile. "Back again, honey." I sat at the counter. "Do you remember someone who used to know Margot back then? Back when she was pregnant?" The woman raised a brow. "You mean back when the whole church tried to pretend she didn't exist?" I blinked. "What?" "Margot's dad was Pastor Doyle Lancaster," she said, cracking open a bottle of cream soda. "Real fire and brimstone type. That girl vanished overnight. Rumors said she ran away with a boy from another town, but after she came back alone, all anyone knew was that she'd had a baby and lost him." I gripped the counter. "Did anyone help her?" She shook her head. "Not in this town. She was shunned. Folks acted like she was a ghost." I looked down. My knuckles were white. "She was 17, I whispered. "She didn't deserve that. None of us do," the woman said, then paused. "Though, there was one person, her cousin Abby. They were close growing up. Where is she now? Lives up on Ridgecrest Road. Big white farmhouse, with a red barn. Can't miss it. I tossed cash on the counter and left without my soda. The drive to Ridgecrest was steep and winding. Trees arched overhead like reaching arms. When I arrived, a large brown dog barked as I approached the porch. A woman in her late 50s stepped out with a watering can. "Can I help you?" I hesitated. "Are you Abby? Abby Taylor?" "I am." I took a breath. "I'm Chase, Margot's son." She dropped the watering can. "Oh my God," she whispered, covering her mouth. "I need to ask you something," I said. "Did you send me that letter?" She stared at me for a long moment, then nodded. "I did." Inside, the farmhouse was cozy. Lace curtains, stacks of old books, a fireplace with black and white photos on the mantel. "Why?" I asked. "Why now?" She poured tea, hands trembling. "Because Margot deserves to know her son before it's too late." My heart dropped. "What does that mean? She didn't tell you?" I shook my head. Abby looked down. "She has lupus. The aggressive kind. Diagnosed last year. She's been hiding it from everyone." My breath caught. "She's dying," I whispered. "She doesn't want pity," Abby said. "But the flare-ups are getting worse. Last month, she fainted in her shop. I told her she had to tell you, but she wouldn't. She said you had your own life, that she didn't want to burden you." My hands clenched into fists. "She's not a burden," I said through my teeth. "She's my mother." Abby's eyes filled with tears. I watched her cry every birthday. 30 years of letters. 30 years of guilt. She lost everything, her family, her name, her health. But she never stopped hoping you'd come back. I stared at the floor, then stood. "Thank you," I said. "Where are you going?" "To tell her I'm not leaving." When I returned to the cabin, she was sitting on the porch, lantern glowing beside her. "You okay?" she asked, startled by my sudden arrival. I sat next to her. "You should have told me." She froze. "Told you what? That you're sick?" "Silence then, Abby." I nodded. She looked away. "I didn't want your first memory of me to be dying." I took her hand. "You're not dying today. I'm not leaving tomorrow." She turned to me, tears welling. "Chase, I lost you once. Not again." She broke, and this time I didn't just stand there. I pulled her close and held on. The trees had just started to turn. Bright yellows and deep oranges laced the hills like fire spreading across the mountains. Margot and I sat on the back porch, wrapped in sweaters, sharing slices of cinnamon apple pie and letting the silence between us say what words couldn't. She was quieter now, her body tired easily. The pills lined up on the kitchen counter had doubled. Sometimes her fingers trembled when she tried to hold a spoon, but she never complained. She never let me see her break except in the quietest moments. Like that morning, I found her asleep at the kitchen table, pen still in hand, halfway through a letter she never finished. "Chase, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone." I folded the page before reading further. I wasn't ready. Not yet. That day I called my job in Asheville. "Is this about that sabbatical you've been asking for?" my boss asked. I hesitated, then said, "Yeah, something came up." They approved it. I didn't tell them what it was. Didn't tell anyone. Margot and I started spending our days like they were borrowed, because they were. We took long drives through the mountains. She taught me how to arrange flowers and let me name one of her shop's bouquets. She introduced me to her closest friends, women who looked at me with tear-filled smiles and said, "So you're the one she never stopped loving." But the best moments were quiet, like sitting on the porch listening to her hum old folk songs. Or the night she handed me a worn book of baby names, still bookmarked at C. "I was going to name you Colton," she whispered. "But something about Chase just felt right when I held you." I didn't tell her that for years I hated my name. It always sounded like I was running. Now, it felt like I'd finally stopped. But there was one part of the story I still didn't understand. One thing that wouldn't leave me alone. Why did the Whitakers adopt me? Why would two cold, detached people fight to raise a child they never truly loved? One night I asked Margot that. She looked out the window, eyes distant. "I think you need to ask Waylon," she said. "Before it's too late." I blinked. "What?" She nodded slowly. "Your foster father. It wasn't always the way you remember. When I was young, he was my older cousin." My stomach twisted. "What?" She didn't flinch. He was 4 years older. Grew up in the same church. always serious, always following the rules. He and I weren't close, but when I ran, I sent one letter, just one. To him I was desperate. I begged him to help me keep you. I stared at her, stunned. I think he wanted to help, in his own way. He and Patrice had been trying to have kids for years with no luck. I think he saw it as a trade. He'd take you in, give you a stable home, but something changed. Maybe he thought I abandoned you. Maybe Patrice poisoned his heart. She looked at me, her face crumpling. I don't know, but Chase, I think you need to ask him why he took you. You deserve that truth. The next morning, I got in the truck and drove 6 hours back to Pine Hollow. The town hadn't changed. Same broken stoplight at Main and Ridge. Same kids biking past the gas station. Same church steeple casting long shadows like a judgment you never asked for. The Whitaker house sat at the edge of town like a monument to misplaced pride. Still white, still perfect, still cold. I parked and stood at the base of the driveway, heart hammering. Then walked up, knocked. The door opened. Waylon stood there, older, thinner eyes sunk into his skull like someone had hollowed him out. He stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. Chase, he said. I didn't answer. Patrice died last winter, he added, like it was supposed to mean something. I just nodded. He stepped aside. You want to come in? The house was the same. Same stiff-backed furniture. Same smell of lemon polish and unspoken rules. We sat at the table. Neither of us spoke. Then finally I asked, "Why did you take me?" His jaw twitched. "Because I owed your mother," she told me, I said, "about the letter." He nodded. She begged, and I thought, maybe we could help each other. Patrice and I were drowning in miscarriages. I didn't tell her the truth. I said you were abandoned. You lied? He looked away. I didn't want to, but I knew she wouldn't say yes otherwise. I stood, fury rising. So you took me as a bargaining chip, a guilt debt. Waylon's voice cracked. At first, yes, but then. I just didn't know how to be a father to someone who looked at me like I was a stranger. I laughed bitterly. Because you were. He nodded. I thought giving you food and clothes and a roof would be enough, but you needed more, and I didn't know how to give it. I stared at him. You had 30 years. Silence. He reached for something in his pocket, a small velvet box. Pushed it toward me. I kept this, he said. You made it when you were 9, for Father's Day. I opened the box. Inside was a leather keychain, warped and weathered, with shaky carving that read, "To Dad Love, Chase." I swallowed hard. I know I failed you, he whispered. I thought if I kept pretending I was doing the right thing, eventually I'd believe it. I pocketed the box and stood. Thank you, I said. For what? I asked. For finally being honest. And I walked out of that house for the last time. Back at the cabin, Margot was curled on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. You okay? She asked. Seeing my face, I got what I needed. Closure, not quite, I said, sitting beside her, but enough to move forward. She smiled faintly. That's all we get, isn't it? The days grew shorter. Her cough got worse. Some nights, I'd sit beside her bed, just listening to her breathe. Other nights, she'd tell me stories of being 17, of writing poems, of dreaming about a house filled with books and a little boy who loved trains. One morning, I walked into the living room and found her asleep in the armchair, a book resting on her lap. A letter was tucked beside it. My name on the front. I didn't open it. Not yet. I just sat across from her, watching the rise and fall of her chest, because I knew. One day soon, that rise would stop. Margot passed away on a Tuesday morning. There was no thunder, no wind through the trees, just silence. As if the earth held its breath to honor her departure. I found her in the armchair, head tilted slightly, face turned toward the lake like she was watching the sunrise even in her sleep. A knit blanket pulled around her feet.
Ow.
One hand rested on her chest. The other, limp, held the handle of her favorite mug, still half full, still warm. And beside her, tucked into the folds of the book she was reading, The Secret Life of Trees, was the envelope. My name was written in blue ink, slanted, careful. I sat beside her for over an hour, unable to speak, unable to cry, just staring at her like she'd sit up at any moment and tell me I was being dramatic. But she didn't. When I finally opened the letter, My hands trembled so violently the paper almost tore.
Ace.
I knew the moment you walked into the flower shop that you were mine. No DNA test, no legal proof, just my heart recognizing its other half. I want you to know something, and I need you to believe it, even if it's hard. I never stopped loving you, not for a moment, even when I was angry at the world, even when I cursed God, even when I thought I'd lost you forever. Finding you again gave me peace. You gave me the ending I never thought I'd get, but I don't want my death to be your new beginning. You've already lived too much pain. You deserve life. Laughter, a family of your own. People who call you home without conditions. And Chase, you're not broken. You never were. You were just misplaced. Don't let my story become your shadow. Write your own. Light your own lantern. Always, Mom. I sat on the porch for hours after that, watching the lake turn to glass. By sunset, I buried the letter in a wooden box alongside the shoebox from the attic. My beginning and my end, side by side. The funeral was small. Just me, Abby, 2 women from Margot's flower cope, and the pastor from a nearby church who'd once let her store extra vases in his basement during a flood. No hymns, no eulogies, just a poem I read at the edge of the cemetery. She bloomed in silence in gardens no one visited, but still she bloomed. Then I lit the old lantern, the one that once waited for me on her porch, and left it beside the headstone. I stayed until the sun dipped below the trees. Then I walked away. 3 weeks passed. I returned to Asheville, but it didn't feel like home. My apartment was filled with echoes of Margot's voice, of the lake wind, of all the words we never got to say. I kept her business card tucked in my wallet. I found myself still checking the mail, half expecting another envelope written in her hand. I thought about going back to work. I didn't. I thought about selling the cabin. I didn't. Instead, I returned. To the house by the lake. I mowed the lawn, pruned her rose bushes, washed her tea mugs, and placed them carefully in the cupboard. And then I opened the flower shop. Petals and moss. The sign still hung crooked above the trellis. I wasn't a florist, had no business running a shop, but people came anyway. A man bought sunflowers for his wife's first chemo appointment. A teenage girl ordered white tulips for a forgiveness letter. An old woman bought a cactus and said, "For my son. He's tough," and just like that. The shop breathed again. One rainy Tuesday, a stranger walked in. Tall, wiry suit jacket, too formal for a flower shop. His eyes scanned every detail. "You Chase Whitaker?" I nodded. He handed me a sealed envelope. "I'm an estate lawyer from Nashville. I represent a trust that's been waiting for your return." I raised a brow. "Return from where?" "Your mother named you as the sole heir. The property, the shop, the accounts. She signed the papers a year ago, just in case." I swallowed. She really believed I'd come back. She said if he didn't, it would go to the community center. But she always believed. I took the envelope. Inside was everything. She left it all to me. Not because she had to, because she wanted to. That night, I walked through every room in the cabin, room by room, touching walls, running fingers along windowsills. Then I stood in her bedroom, opened the closet, and found a box labeled Chase's First Christmas. Inside was a single red onesie, a tiny pair of booties, and a card with glitter peeling at the corners. "I don't know where you are, baby boy, but I hope you're warm." I held the card against my chest and whispered into the dark, "I am, Mom. I really am." One day, while organizing the back of the flower shop, I found a folder labeled Letters, Never Sent. Dozens of pages, all addressed to one person, Waylon Whitaker. I hesitated. Then I read, "You said you'd help me. You promised you'd protect him. But I heard nothing for decades. Was it guilt? Or did you simply forget he was mine too? I don't hate you, Waylon. But I pity you, because you had the chance to raise someone extraordinary. And you chose fear over love. If you ever see him again, please, tell him I never gave up, even when you did." My hands trembled. Waylon never read these, never even knew she'd written them. And somehow that made it worse. Later that week, I drove back to Pine Hollow one last time. Not to see Waylon. To see Gus, the old mechanic who first told me I'd need to build my own place to belong. His shop was quieter now, dustier. But when he saw me walk through the door, he dropped his wrench and stared like he'd seen a ghost. "You finally found her, didn't you?" he asked. He lit a cigar and handed me one. I nodded. She was everything, I said. He lit a cigar and handed me one. We sat on rusted stools, smoke curling around us. You look lighter, he said. I feel lighter. He smiled. Told you? People like us misplaced, forgotten we. Don't wait for someone to save us. We build our own damn homes. I looked out the garage window at the sun setting over the cornfield, and for the first time in my life, I believed him. I didn't go back to Asheville, not to live at least. Instead, I stayed, in the cabin by the lake, in the flower shop my mother had built with her bare hands and her broken heart. I started learning how to run it the way she had, not just with blooms and bouquets, but with purpose. Margot's regulars welcomed me without hesitation. Miss Lila, who bought peonies every Sunday for her sister's grave, started bringing me cherry pies and gossip. Mr. Brennan, the retired barber, helped me repaint the trellis one afternoon after the wind knocked it loose. And one morning, a woman in her early 20s came in asking for rosemary and forget-me-nots. Making an arrangement for my birth mother? She said quietly. Just met her last week. I paused, holding the bouquet in my hand, then offered it to her. No charge. She stared. Are you sure? I nodded. Some things are meant to be given, not sold. One weekend, I drove out to a nursery 2 hours south, picked out saplings, lavender, rosemary, wild strawberries, planted them in the soil behind the cabin, where Margot's rocking chair still creaked in the wind. I wasn't trying to fill the space she left behind. I was trying to give it something that would grow. Then came the box. It arrived unannounced, no return label, just my name, handwritten in blocky letters. Inside were 3 things. 1. A burnt journal, pages half-charred but still legible in places. 2. A cassette tape. 3. A folded note. He owed you more than silence. There was no signature. The journal pages were written in tight, rigid handwriting. It took me less than 5 lines to recognize them. Waylon. I sat on the porch with shaking hands and read. June 12, 1993, Chase turned for last month. He asked me if I was his real dad. I told him yes. He smiled and hugged my leg, and I lied straight through my teeth. September 9th, 1995. He made a leather bracelet for Patricia's birthday. She threw it away. He found it in the trash and didn't say a word, just took it back to his room. I pretended not to notice. November 14th, 1999. I don't know why I agreed to this. Maybe I thought I could erase Margot from my life by raising her son. Maybe I wanted to fix something I'd never even touched. But all I've done is watch him become someone I'm not worthy of. August 3rd, 2001. He's going to college soon. Full ride. Never asked me for a dime. Just packed up like the house meant nothing to him. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe that's my fault. There were more entries. Pages filled with regret, written too late. As if he knew the apology he'd never say out loud could at least live in ink. The tape was older, dusty. I didn't even own a player, so I drove to an antique store the next town over. When I pressed play, the static came first, then his voice. The low, flat, but not hollow. Chase, if you're hearing this, it means I'm gone. You're too much of a coward to say any of it in person. That wouldn't surprise me. I didn't deserve to raise you. You were never mine, and I think I punished you for that without realizing. Told myself for years that you were lucky just to have a home. Deep down I knew. Was lucky you didn't leave sooner. You were better than all of us. Even as a boy you had this spark. And I smothered it. I thought if I ignored it, you'd grow up needing me less. But the truth is, I was afraid. Afraid you'd find out who you really were, and once you did, you'd leave me behind like I left your mother. If I could go back, I'd sit beside you every night and read. I'd fix that bike you worked on. I'd tell Patrice to shut the hell up and treat you like a son. I'd do everything differently, but I can't. So here's what I'll do instead. I'm leaving you the shop keys. The house is yours if you want it. Sell it. Burn it. Turn it into something better than I ever made it. And if you can't forgive me, I understand. Just promise me this. Don't carry my silence like a weight. Let it go. You deserve to fly. The tape ended. I didn't cry. But I sat there for hours, the cassette spinning in silence, wondering if it counted as an apology if it only came after the end. I never responded to the box, never found out who sent it. But I did take one thing Waylon said seriously. turn it into something better than I ever made it. So I drove back to Pine Hollow one last time, and I sold the house, took the money, and donated every cent to a community center for foster kids in Lancaster County. Kids who needed books, blankets, someone to look them in the eye and say, "You matter." Then I returned to my mother's cabin, to her flowers, her memories, to the roots she left behind. Weeks passed, then months. The seasons turned. I turned with them. Until one morning, just as the first snowfall dusted the roof, a woman walked into the shop, wearing a red coat, nervous eyes, holding a baby in her arms. She looked around, breathing in the scent of rosemary and rosewater. "This used to be Margot's place, right?" she asked. I nodded. "Still is." The woman smiled. "I was adopted. Found my birth mother 2 years ago. We talk now, but she's nervous. She still thinks I resent her." I leaned on the counter. "Do you?" "No," she said. "I just don't know how to say thank you without it sounding like I'm thanking her for leaving." I nodded slowly, then picked out a single lily. "Take this," I said. She smiled. "How much?" I shook my head. "Tell her it's from a boy who got a second chance." She blinked, then whispered, "Thank you," and walked out into the snow. That night I sat on the porch with the lantern glowing beside me. Snowflakes caught in the light like falling stars. I lit a candle for Margot, one for Waylon, and one for every broken thing that healed without anyone noticing. And I asked myself, if we're not where we came from, then what are we? Maybe we're what we choose to become. Spring came like an exhale, the kind that follows a long cry. The flower shop bloomed with new colors. Lavender, coral roses, tulips in every shade of sunrise. And with it came people returning customers, wandering strangers, children pressed against the glass, just to point at the violets. The cabin didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt lived in, felt like home. One afternoon, I was transplanting lilacs outside, when a familiar voice called out behind me, "Well, look who's finally got dirt under his nails." I turned Abby. She stood with her hands in the pockets of a faded denim jacket, hair longer now, eyes just as sharp. Beside her, a duffel bag and a camera case slung over her shoulder. I stared. "What are you doing here?" She smiled. "Road tripping. Needed a break from photographing everyone else's life. Figured it was time to come see how yours turned out." I hugged her, longer than I thought I would. That night we drank tea on the porch. The stars were out. Lake shimmered under a half moon. "You look like you," she said softly. I raised a brow. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means, this is the version of Chase I always believed existed. The one who just needed space to stop surviving and start living." I looked at her. "I didn't think I'd make it here." She nodded. "Sometimes surviving is the journey." We didn't talk about Margot. We didn't need to. Abby had met her once briefly at the shop. Margot had called her the one who takes pictures of people trying not to cry, which in Margot's world was a compliment. A few days turned into a week. Abby stayed, helped me reorganize the back room, took portraits of the shop for a new website, built a wooden sign together that read, "We bloom again." "People will ask what it means," I said. She grinned. "Let them. Every flower shop needs a bit of mystery." One evening, while cleaning the attic, Abby found a second journal I didn't know existed. Not Waylon's, Margot's. It was tucked behind a crate of dried herbs. On the inside cover, she had written, "For when he's ready." I wasn't sure I was. But I opened it anyway. 2nd, 1993. He's gone. I gave him up. My arms still feel heavy, empty. I thought the ache would pass, but it hasn't. It's bone deep. May 5th, 1994. I saw a boy in town today who looked like what Chase might be now. Brown curls, big eyes. He pointed at me and said, "Mama," to his mother. I had to leave the grocery store in tears. December 12th, 1996. I started sending letters, just one a year, to Waylon. I never got a response, but I keep sending them anyway. Maybe silence is his answer. July 8th, 2005, I saw an article in the paper. Local boy wins state science fair, Chase Whitaker. My hands shook so hard I spilled tea everywhere. He's alive, he's brilliant. I clipped the article and taped it inside the cupboard where I keep my favorite mugs. April 1st, 2015, I dreamt he came back. Walked into the shop like it was the most normal thing in the world. Asked for marigolds, called me Ma. I woke up smiling. Cried anyway. November 3rd, 2020, the cancer's back. I don't think I'll get another spring. But I lit the porch lantern anyway, just in case. I read every page. Some twice. Some aloud to myself, to Abby, to the wind. And with each one, I realized something. Margot didn't just love me. She waited for me. Every single day. Even when the world told her to move on. Even when the calendar turned and the hope shrank. She believed I'd return. And somehow, I did. Later that week, I asked Abby to stay. Not forever, just longer. I think I finally have room in my life for more than ghosts, I said. She smiled. Then maybe I can stop running from mine too. I kissed on the dock as the sun dipped low, turning the lake gold. It wasn't fireworks. It was something quieter, something safer, something earned. I began writing again, not in secret, not in scraps, but with intention. A memoir, a story, a reckoning. Title misplaced. The first line. I used to think love was something you had to deserve. But then I met the woman who gave it away for free. The flower shop got busier. We added a little cafe nook, started hosting small poetry nights. I even let a group of kids paint the back wall with the mural flowers bursting out of cracked pavement. They titled it, Still Growing. One evening, as summer neared, I walked out behind the cabin and stood under the lilac tree I planted. It had bloomed. Soft purple clusters spilling like memories into the air. I knelt beside it, lit a candle, and whispered, "You did good, Mom." And for the first time in my life, I believed I had too. It was a warm September evening when I decided to host the first annual blooming night, a soft ceremony, not for loss. For life, we invited everyone, locals, travelers, lonely hearts who wandered into the shop just looking for color. Abby set up lanterns along the dock. I brewed Margot's rose tea recipe, and by sunset the entire lake shimmered with lights. Each guest wrote the name of someone they missed, someone who gave them love, or tried to. And one by one, they set their lanterns afloat across the water. Some whispered prayers, some cried quietly, some just watched, hands in their pockets, letting the wind carry away everything they couldn't say. I stood at the edge of the dock with my own lantern, no name written. Just a single pressed marigold inside. I set it down gently, gave it a push, and watched it drift. That night, after everyone had gone, Abby and I stayed behind. She took photos. I cleaned up the teacups. Then we sat under the lilac tree and looked out over the lake. "You think they saw them?" she asked. "Who? The ones we wrote to? The ones we lost?" I nodded. "I think they've been watching all along." She rested her head on my shoulder. And in the quiet, I thought back to every version of myself I had survived to become this one. The scared boy in Pine Hollow. The angry teen in the attic. The loner in Asheville. The man on the porch who almost didn't knock on his mother's door. Finally, the man who bloomed. 1 year later, the shop was still standing. So was the cabin. So was I. Our second blooming night drew a crowd twice the size. Abby had published a photo essay titled, "We Bloom Again." That won an award and ended up in a New York gallery. I got an email from a woman in Vermont who read my book and said, "I called my birth mother after 23 years. Your story gave me the courage," I cried. Harder than I thought I would, then sent her a pressed marigold with a note. Healing isn't a destination. It's a garden. You visit it again and again. One day I found a letter in the mailbox from a boy named Eli, 14 years old, foster care. Scared, angry. Sounded like someone I used to be. He wrote, "I read your book in my group home. I didn't think guys like you existed. Do you really believe people like us can be loved?" I wrote back, "You already are. You just haven't met the ones who know how to show it yet." We wrote back and forth for months. Then one day he asked if he could visit. I said yes. Eli came with bruised eyes and a chipped tooth and shoulders too heavy for his age. He didn't speak much at first, just stared at the mural on the back wall. Still growing. Then he turned to me and asked, "Did you ever want to disappear?" I said yes. Then I said, "But I'm really glad I didn't." He didn't cry, but he didn't leave either. That was enough. Today the shop is closed just for the day. Abby's painting in the back, light spilling across her canvas. I'm on the porch finishing this letter. My story, not the end. Just this chapter. The next one, I'll let it bloom when it's ready. But for now, here's what I've learned. You are not your origin. You are not your wound. You are not unloved. You are in bloom. Maybe still in soil. Maybe under frost. Maybe bent beneath memory. But blooming, and that's enough. The final words I ever wrote for Margot sit in a frame on the shop counter. They say, she gave the world flowers, even when it gave her thorns.